My name is Natalie Patel, and the moment I saw the notice taped to my front door, I knew exactly who was behind it. The words were printed in heavy black font, centered on official-looking letterhead, flapping slightly in the breeze like it had something important to say. Cease and desist. Unauthorized business operation in residential zone. I stared at it in silence, grocery bag still in my arms, the Arizona sun heating the back of my neck. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew. There were only so many people who could have taken the time to make trouble like this, and in my quiet Phoenix suburb, the shortlist had one name at the top. Karen Whitfield. My next-door neighbor. She'd made her disapproval clear the day I moved in, just over a year ago. The house was a modest mid-century ranch, nothing extravagant, but I loved it. The bones were good, the light poured into my converted garage studio, and the backyard was big enough for the wild herbs I grew in pots along the fence. But to Karen, I might as well have driven up in a rusted food truck. The first comment came during my first week here. "You're Natalie, right?" she said over the chain-link fence one morning. "I just hope you know we like things quiet around here." I smiled, polite. "Same here. I run a graphic design business, mostly from home. It's just me and my dog, Fig." She blinked. "Home business, huh? Well, I hope your clients know how to park responsibly. Our HOA has some firm guidelines about that." She said HOA like it was the FBI. What she didn't realize was that I'd done my homework thoroughly. The house had been rezoned through a special variance by the previous owner, who was a retired architect and had also run a small business from the garage. I had copies of the permit approvals. The zoning variance was legally recorded with the property deed. Everything I was doing, from accepting deliveries to having the occasional client park in the driveway, was within the letter of the law. But Karen didn't care about law. Karen cared about control. And when people like that lose it, they go looking for cracks. First, it was complaints about unauthorized delivery vehicles. Then it was muttering loudly to another neighbor about devaluing the neighborhood. Then it escalated to snapping pictures of a client's car when they parked slightly over the curb line. I never said anything. I just nodded, smiled, and made sure my bins were in by Thursday morning. Until the letter showed up. I peeled it off the door and carried it inside. The bags were heavy, milk, flour, spinach, wilting fast. But I didn't even unpack. I stood in the kitchen, reading it twice. According to the complaint, I was violating zoning regulations by operating a business out of a residential zone. But the wording was specific. It also alleged property boundary violations contributing to neighborhood disruption. That's when something clicked. This wasn't about my business at all. It was about my driveway. My studio entrance was through the garage, and last year I'd paid a local contractor to expand the driveway slightly, just a few feet of paved extension so clients didn't have to reverse out of a tight curve. It was done cleanly, with permits on file. But this letter was using that addition as leverage. Boundary encroachment, it said. Driveway extension crosses onto adjacent property. I closed the letter. Karen hadn't just filed a zoning complaint. She'd accused me of trespassing. I set the paper down and exhaled slowly. The fear hit me first, cold and quiet, the kind that sinks into your stomach and tells you this could spiral, a shutdown, fines, maybe even legal action if the county sided with her. But then came something else, clarity. I had two choices, fight this emotionally or handle it strategically, and I knew exactly which one would leave a longer-lasting impression. So I picked up my phone, Googled the best-rated surveyor in Maricopa County, and booked an appointment for the following Monday. If there was a boundary issue, I wanted to know. And if there wasn't, well, then it was time to measure something else entirely. Karen's own line. The surveyor arrived right on time. His name was Greg, a soft-spoken man in his late 50s with skin like leather from decades in the Arizona sun. He wore khaki cargo pants, a faded polo, and carried a metal clipboard like it was an extension of his arm. We walked the property together. Me pointing out the original stakes I'd seen during move-in, him nodding thoughtfully as he unfolded maps and unzipped a long, narrow bag containing measuring equipment. I showed him the driveway extension, then stood back as he got to work. Greg didn't speak much as he measured. He used GPS pins, red flag markers, and a digital theodolite I couldn't begin to explain. Every so often he made a soft humming sound or jotted something down. The sun crept higher. I brought out water bottles. Fig, my golden mutt, followed Greg around like a curious assistant. It took nearly 4 hours. Finally, he called me over to the shade of a mesquite tree and flipped his clipboard around. "Miss Patel," he said, "your driveway is well within your property line. The extension doesn't come close to the easement." I exhaled. Thank God. "But," he added, "there is an encroachment issue." My stomach clenched. He turned the clipboard and tapped his pen against the sketch. "Right here," he said. "This fence, your neighbor's garden fence, it extends about 2.8 feet onto your property, roughly the entire length of the side yard." I blinked. "Are you sure?" He looked up. "I've been doing this since before GPS. Yes, I'm sure." I looked over at the fence in question. Karen's fence. White pickets, ornamental arches, perfectly manicured roses curling up its side. I remembered her bragging once about having it custom-built for curb appeal. "My own little bit of English charm," she'd said. "According to county records," Greg continued, "this fence was installed 8 years ago. I pulled the permit history too. No permit was ever filed." I felt something shift inside me, part disbelief, part cold amusement. "She built it without a permit, and onto land she doesn't own." Greg nodded. "Technically, yes, and that's a zoning violation. If you choose to file a boundary encroachment complaint, the county could order it removed. There's also potential for fines, especially if she modified drainage or planted anything permanent on your side." I thanked him, paid the invoice, and requested a full report with GPS visuals and stamped certification. He promised it by Friday. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and watched the sun dip behind the fence, her fence, knowing that 2.8 feet of it belonged to me. The irony was almost poetic. Karen had come after me with rules, with assumptions, with noise, and she'd built her petty kingdom on land that wasn't even hers. I didn't say anything right away. Not to her, not to the county. I wanted to move with precision. So I spent the next day gathering everything. I printed my home business variance, the approval stamped with the county seal. I pulled permits for the driveway expansion. I gathered emails from the contractor, photos of the construction process, before and after shots, everything in tidy folders. Then I opened a new file on my laptop, zoning complaint response documentation.pdf. And a second one, fence encroachment evidence.pdf. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about being thorough. If Karen wanted to play the game, that was fine. I just had better tools. By the time the zoning inspector arrived for the official follow-up, I was more than ready. He showed up in a beige county sedan, clipboard in hand, official badge clipped to his chest. His name was Eric, young, polite, serious in the way people are when they know they're stepping into potential drama and want to pretend they're just there to check boxes. I greeted him calmly, motioned toward the garage, and offered him a bottle of water before he started his review. I'd laid everything out on the front table in neat stacks: business license, zoning variance, driveway permits, digital copies on a USB, and a hard copy of the surveyor's stamped report. He scanned the paperwork silently, flipping through the folder, nodding now and then. "I've got to admit," he said finally, "this is the most organized response I've seen in a long time." I smiled. "I've had a few days to prepare." We walked around the perimeter of the property while he compared the real-world layout to Greg's survey. I pointed out the driveway, the original stakes, the side fencing line. He crouched to check the base of the extension and measured a few points. "Looks good to me," he said. "No violations here." I led him to the garden side. Karen's fence stood pristine as ever, a row of painted slats and climbing roses, now, in my eyes, no longer quaint, but intrusive. Eric squinted at the red flags Greg had placed along the property line. "Survey says this is about 2.5 feet onto your lot," he said. I nodded. No permit filed in the county record, either. He stood silently for a moment, then pulled out his phone to take photos. "Okay," he said, "I'll write this up. The original complaint about your business is invalid. You're fully covered by your variance and permits. But this fence? Yeah, that's a zoning violation, especially with no permit on file." I kept my tone even. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I would like it on record." Eric nodded. "Absolutely. I'll file a report today. She'll get a formal notice within the week." After he left, I sat back down on my porch with a second glass of wine and waited. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I spotted the envelope in Karen's mailbox as I watered my front herbs. Official county seal. Bold red letters, notice of property violation. The next morning I caught a glimpse of her pacing in her driveway, envelope in one hand, phone in the other. Her face was flushed, her voice sharp. Though I couldn't hear her exact words, I didn't need to. She'd gone looking for leverage. Instead, she handed me the high ground on a silver platter. Still, I said nothing. No smug remarks, no pointed glares, just a pleasant smile whenever we happened to cross paths. And then, 3 days later, it happened. I was trimming the sage bushes in my front garden when Karen walked over. She hesitated on the edge of my property line, ironically, the one she had previously ignored, and cleared her throat. "Miss Patel," she said stiffly. I looked up, gloved hands resting on the shears. "Karen?" I replied evenly. She took a breath. I might have been a little hasty with my concerns. I didn't answer, just let the silence hang there until she continued. "I didn't realize you had all the paperwork," she added. "I just thought, well, I didn't know about the variance." "And the fence?" I asked gently. She hesitated again. "That was an oversight from years ago." I gave her a small nod, not smiling. "Not yet." "Perhaps," she said, trying to salvage grace, "we could discuss a solution that works for both of us." Now I smiled, not with malice, just calm, clean clarity. "I'd be happy to help," I said. "I actually work with a few local contractors who do fencing work. I've designed branding packages for some of them. Great people. I could give you a neighbor discount." She blinked, caught off guard by the offer. "I'd appreciate that," she said, voice quiet. I nodded again. "No problem. Just let me know when you're ready to start." Karen turned and walked back to her side of the yard, and I went back to trimming my sage. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, I sat on the back patio with Fig curled at my feet and a notepad in my lap. The air smelled like basil and dust, typical Phoenix cocktail after a dry day. I wasn't writing anything urgent, just sketching rough drafts of fence designs. Karen hadn't officially asked yet, but I had a feeling she would. Not because she trusted me, but because she'd finally figured out I wasn't the one she should have underestimated. In the days that followed, she softened, barely, but noticeably. No more glares when packages arrived. No more huffing when a client's car idled for 2 minutes outside my house. She even waved once, tentatively, when I passed her in the neighborhood park. I didn't wave back, not out of spite, but because I was done performing courtesy for people who weaponized politeness when it suited them, then discarded it the second they thought they had power. I had spent the better part of my adult life being pleasant, smiling to keep things easy, shrinking to avoid tension, over-explaining myself just to stay liked. But this entire experience taught me something I hadn't expected. You don't have to raise your voice to make yourself heard. You don't have to play dirty to win. Sometimes all it takes is knowing the rules better than the person trying to break them. The following week, I got a follow-up notice from the county. Case closed. My business was officially cleared, complaint marked invalid, and a copy of the documentation had been added to my property file to prevent future disputes. I printed it, filed it, labeled it in my studio folder drawer under Zoning Defense, 2024. 2 days later, Karen knocked on my door. She looked different, still stiff, still wearing that overpressed polo like it came with a homeowners association badge. But there was something behind her eyes that wasn't quite pride, and wasn't quite shame. Just surrender. "I spoke with the contractor you mentioned," she said. "He said you referred him. I've scheduled them for next month." I nodded. "Great choice. They're honest." She hesitated. "Would you maybe be willing to help with the design? I mean, you do this sort of thing professionally, right?" I tilted my head slightly. "I do, and yes, I'd be willing to help." Her shoulders dropped a bit. Relief, maybe. I didn't charge her. Not because she didn't deserve to pay, but because her payment had already arrived in full the day that envelope hit her mailbox, and she realized her own fence was standing on ground that wasn't hers. A few days after that, a new survey stake appeared between our houses. Then another. Then the sound of a post-hole digger early on a Saturday. Her new fence came up slowly, piece by piece, each board resting where it legally belonged, on her side of the line. No roses this time, just compliance. And peace. The neighborhood grew quiet again. Not the cold kind, but the kind I'd imagined when I first moved in. The kind I'd hoped to build. And it was mine now. Undisputed. Measured and marked. Exactly 2.8 feet at a time. A few weeks after the new fence went up, I stood at the edge of my yard, sipping coffee and staring at the clean straight line dividing our properties. No roses, no decorative arches, no subtle claim on space that wasn't hers. Just fresh lumber, evenly spaced and properly installed. It looked right, simple, lawful, like a correction that had been quietly accepted and sealed into wood. I thought back to how it had all started. One printed complaint taped to my front door. A challenge not just to my livelihood, but to my right to exist in peace on my own land. Karen hadn't just questioned the legitimacy of my work. She tried to shake my stability, to rattle my foundation. People like her do that. Not with direct threats, but with whispers. With formality disguised as civility. With paperwork, mailed and stamped, designed to make you doubt what you know you've earned. But the truth is, I had built my business the way I built my fence design portfolio. Carefully, legally, intentionally. I didn't cut corners. I didn't leave gaps. I didn't have to shout to prove anything. The proof had always been in the permits. The funny thing is, the neighborhood changed after that. Not in a dramatic way. No angry confrontations or public apologies. Just subtle shifts. One neighbor who'd always kept their distance started waving at me in the mornings. Another dropped off homemade tamales just because. Someone posted in the community forum asking for graphic design referrals, and 2 different people tagged my name. Word gets around, even when no one says it aloud. I became the woman who stood her ground. But not by fighting, not by yelling, just by documenting. Just by knowing what she was doing. Just by refusing to be intimidated by someone louder. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a message from a local landscape architecture firm I'd worked with once. They were revamping their brand and wanted me to lead the design. The offer was double what I'd charged the year before. I said yes. Later that day, as I stood in my garage studio reviewing client briefs, I realized something else had changed too. Something quieter. Me. I was no longer waiting for people to accept me or to give me permission to take up space. I didn't feel like I was defending my right to work from my own home. I wasn't trying to appease anyone. I was just existing, fully and freely, in a space I had protected. Not with anger, but with clarity. That kind of peace isn't loud, but it's powerful. And it lasts longer than any complaint ever will. A few months passed, and life fell back into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. My business grew, quietly, steadily. A few local contractors I'd collaborated with started referring clients my way. Branding packages, storefront signage, updated logos. My little garage studio, once the center of neighborhood suspicion, had become a legitimate design hub for small businesses in the area. Even Karen stayed quiet. She'd nod occasionally when we passed each other in the yard, but the edge was gone. The weight in her shoulders had shifted, from defensive to neutral. She'd learned the limits of her reach, and I didn't need her apology. The boundary, both literal and emotional, had been restored. One Saturday morning, I was outside replanting lavender in the front bed when she stepped into her driveway holding a set of rolled papers. She hovered a moment, then said, "Hey, those contractors you recommended? They did good work." I glanced up and nodded. "Told you they were solid." She held the blueprints awkwardly. "I'm thinking of doing a little backyard update, within the line of course," she added quickly. I didn't smile. Not cold, but not warm either. Just acknowledgement. A pause that said, "We're not enemies anymore, but we'll never be what you thought we were." She hesitated, then added, "Let me know if you ever want to collaborate with our HOA. We've been looking to update some of the community design templates." I raised an eyebrow. Karen, the same woman who tried to have me shut down, now inviting me to help shape the visuals of the neighborhood? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood, dusted off my gloves, and looked her in the eye. "I'll think about it," I said. "If I do, it'll be on my terms." She nodded. "Of course." And that was it. Later that evening, I opened my laptop, pulled up my business dashboard, and looked at the monthly numbers, my most profitable quarter yet. The line graph peaked cleanly at the point the county had cleared my name. The same week, Karen had to tear down her fence and rebuild it, board by board in the right place. Some victories don't come with confetti or a mic drop. Sometimes They arrive in the form of uninterrupted workdays, respectful silence, and the knowledge that no one is trying to take from you what you rightfully earned. And those? Those are the ones that last. It was nearly a year to the day when I received a handwritten card in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, carefully printed on the envelope in neat cursive. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a plain ivory card with a short message. I may not have handled things well. You were right to stand your ground. The neighborhood's better because you stayed. No full name, no apology, no plea for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. I closed the card slowly and slipped it back into the envelope. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just sat on the porch with Fig next to me and let the Arizona breeze run its warm fingers through my hair. Karen's card didn't mean everything, but it meant something. Not because I needed her approval, not anymore, but because I had learned something more important than being accepted. I'd learned how to protect my own peace. And now, every inch of that property, from the studio garage to the reclaimed 2.8 feet of side yard, was mine. Not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. I had reclaimed my space, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice, file a lawsuit, or sink to anyone's level. I had measured. I had documented. I had shown up, calm, correct, and unwilling to be bullied. And that's how I knew. This wasn't just a story about a fence, or a business, or a neighbor who pushed a little too far. This was a story about holding the line, not just the one on a property map, but the invisible one inside us all. The one that says, you don't get to decide how small I have to live. You don't get to redraw my boundaries for your comfort. And if you try, you might just find out that the space you thought was yours never was. That's what I learned. And that's what I kept. Every square foot of it. And that's how I learned. Sometimes the best way to push back is to measure everything and say nothing until it matters. Have you ever had a neighbor cross the line, literally or figuratively? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more true tales of quiet revenge, and send this to someone who knows their property line by heart.